Welcome to the third episode in a Legendarium series about the witch trials. In part 3, The Rage of King James, we will talk about how a bad voyage endured by King James of Scotland, combined with a bizarre scandal involving one of King James' bailiffs, led to a witch hunt of terrifying savagery in Scotland. Even as witch trials raged on in Europe, King James VI of Scotland brought the hysteria to the British Isles. In the Holy Roman Empire, witch hunts only happened if the local prince wanted them to happen. After all, the prince's officials organized search parties, used the courts for trials, and carried out torture and execution. Now a king would take the lead of the witch hunts. King James VI of Scotland was one of the new scholar kings of modern Europe, and he had written a best-selling book called Demonology, which described witchcraft and demonic magic, along with ways to track down and execute witches. King James would begin putting his theories into practice after making one of the few romantic gestures of his life. Anne of Denmark, betrothed to King James, set out across the North Sea to join her new husband in Scotland. Nature intervened, battering her ships and causing one to capsize. King James VI chose to travel to Denmark by boat to collect his new bride. During the crossing, James' fleet also faced severe storms that forced them to return home. Nothing if not persistent, James made a second voyage in 1590 that ended with success. He landed at Kronborg Castle in Denmark, where witch hysteria blazed. Hundreds had already been executed further south in the Holy Roman Empire, and during his stay in Denmark, James VI witnessed the arrest of 2 women in Kronborg. One can only imagine his shock when the authorities tortured them into revealing that they had conjured the storms, which made for James and Anne's unhappy crossings. They further revealed the name of 6 other conspirators and that they had attempted regicide on the orders of Satan. Embers of paranoia flickered in James' mind as he returned home with Anne of Denmark. However, a bizarre scandal involving one of James' bailiffs would fan those embers of fear into an inferno that would burn thousands. That bailiff was David Seaton, a local notable from the small town of Trennet, only 9 miles from Edinburgh. Seaton claimed that his young maid Gillis Duncan had gained miraculous healing powers and began regularly sneaking out at night. He became obsessed with the idea that Gillis met with the devil. One night, he confronted her as she returned from her nighttime excursions, flinging wild accusations at her and beating her. First, he tortured Gillis with thumb screws, crushing bone as she shrieked in pain. Her frantic denials only fed Seaton's obsession with Gillis's guilt. Next, he borrowed a page from the Spanish Inquisition. His other servants bound a rope around Gillis's head, tying it repeatedly around her face. While Seaton angrily demanded her confession, Gillis howled her pain as the servants pulled the ropes tighter and she endured skull fractures. Unable to gain his idea of the truth, he removed her dress and subjected her to inspections. People believed that the devil left a mark upon a person, such as a mole, birthmark, or blemish. Seaton found such a mark upon Gillis's neck. Utterly broken and desperate to make the torture stop, Gillis confessed to witchery. She went to the infamous old Tolbooth jail in Edinburgh, a foul prison. All human waste fed down a pipe built so the stench of urine and feces filled the prison. Chambers filled with screams of horror as if officers tortured prisoners with the iron boot or thumb screws. Those who annoyed the guards would be chained up with iron collars on display for passers-by. Prisoners' apartments housed bare floors for sleeping and a drain for a latrine. Inmates as young as 12 or 14 years old would be chained together. Gillis joined the debtors and delinquents who filled its apartments. Shaking and utterly broken, Gillis confessed to the attempt on James' life. Even worse, she named names. King James himself, already fearing witches from his voyage to Denmark, took an interest in the case. As Gillis provided one name after another, she claimed that Scottish witches had connived with those in Norway to murder a divinely ordained king and queen. This stoked the fires of terror in James' mind. Now he firmly believed that an international cabal of witches intended to murder him. Soon, bailiffs and sheriffs on James' orders began tracking down dozens of women. Soon, the old Tolbooth filled with witches where the torturers plied their trade. The breast ripper ranked among the most infamous devices used by the witch hunters, a living symbol of the rank misogyny that helped to drive the witch trials. It included four-pronged levers that would encase the poor woman and then tear it from her chest with unimaginable pain. Torturers also used the infamous scold's bridle on witches. This variant of the ripper fit around the head and had metal protrusions that slid into the victim's mouth, making it impossible to talk. After such torment, the accused women in the old Tolbooth agreed that they had dug up corpses from local graveyards, dismembered them, and tied the limbs to dead cats. At last, they threw the bloody mess into the sea to conjure a storm to kill King James. Agnes Sampson, a midwife, became one of the victims. After officials beat a confession out of her, King James himself brought her to Holyrood House to interrogate her personally. According to James, he initially did not believe that she had joined the storm-raising coven. However, Agnes gripped his arm, called him a liar, and then whispered some pillow talk that he had shared alone with Queen Anne. This convinced the king that Agnes had been a part of the coven. Most likely, Agnes had learned of the pillow talk through gossip or simply made an educated guess. And if the story is true, Agnes almost certainly wished to simply end her torture. At last, officials dragged as many as 200 so-called confessed witches to St. Andrew's Kirk, a coastal church where the witches supposedly tried to murder King James. While the guards trundled them to the stakes in ox-drawn carts, enraged mobs howled, "Long live the king!" as they pelted the women with stones, pieces of earth, and animal waste. When the authorities bound the victims to the stakes, they granted them the small mercy of strangling them before burning their bodies. As the flames rose and blackened the twitching corpses, the overwhelming stench of burning human fat reduced jeering mobs to coughing and gagging. The stench seeped into the crowd's hair, clothes, and the very walls of surrounding buildings. Given that so many women died in King James' fire, the stench must have been stronger than Samson. Gillis Duncan herself lived about a year longer before she too was fed to the fire. In the years that followed, witch hysteria consumed Scotland. Anything could set off a wave of hunts. A hailstorm, crop failure, animals dying, or severe weather could reduce people to panic and then vengeance. With King James' stamp of approval, witch hunters seized 62 people in East Lothian, a number 33 in Fife, 86 in Aberdeen, and 60 in Ross. Scotland saw about 4,000 people burned alive at the stake for witchcraft, an enormous number relative to its population of 800,000. That is 0.5% of Scotland accused and executed for witchcraft. That wraps things up for this installment of the Legendarium. If you found it informative, please press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.